Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Q Wilson, the Senior Training Associate at Out and Equal. I'm broadcasting today from the Creating Change Conference in a very chilly Houston, Texas. And I'd like to welcome you all to our January Town Call, which also happens to be our second webinar in our Virtual Summit workshop series, which we are delighted to have not one but two fabulous sponsors for this series this year, both Sprint and Fannie Mae. Today's call will be on the new CEI, getting ready for those changes. We have Dina Fetus with us to discuss what those changes will be. So first I'd like to start off with a couple of announcements, the things that are going on with Out and Equal. We do have a Virtual Summit series going on, which are the higher rated workshops from our 2013 Out and Equal Workplace Summit. We'll have the power of LGBT in growth markets with IBM coming up, growing in ally engagement and involvement at Target, executive sponsors, and another topic will be used for our February 25th Virtual Summit space. February 13th, we will have our Workplace Summit, the 2014 Out and Equal Workplace Summit. So the kickoff webinar, this is when you can find out questions about submitting your RFPs for workshops and different things about hotels and just a lot of information to get you started on your planning for the 2014 summit, which will be held in San Francisco this year. On February 27th, we'll have our monthly town call, which will be discovering the strength in our diversity, voices of Latino, Latina, and Hispanic LGBT folks and their allies as well. March 9th through the 11th will be our executive forum, which is held in San Francisco. And on the 11th, we have the Momentum Annual Gala Dinner that runs along with that. And of course, this year, November 3rd through the 6th, we managed to skip the Halloween weekend this time. We will have our Out and Equal Workplace Summit in San Francisco. So if you would please join us or check out our website, outandequal.org, for more information on any of our upcoming trainings or any of the other things we have going on with our organization. I'd like to go over really quickly just some of the webinar features. I know that some of you are unable to hear this broadcast, so I will be sending a number to those who have asked about that. This is a webinar broadcast. It's an audio broadcast, so you should be listening to us through the speakers on your computer or either headphones attached to your computer. Use the chat function to ask questions during the presentation. Only the presenters can see your questions, so feel free to chat away whenever something comes up. We'll get to those as soon as we can, or we'll hold some of them until the Q&A session towards the end. If you have any technical problems, there's a little raise your hand button. Click that, and myself or Pat Bailey will hop on and try to walk you through whatever technical issues you may have. If we have polls, which we do this go around, select your answer, hit submit, and you'll be able to see the results of the poll as we go through this afternoon. And of course, this session is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to review the material. Will be podcasts, an MP3 version, and also slides of our presentation today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and go through a couple of our poll questions to get a feel for our audience here today. So our first question is, my company received a rating of blank on the last Corporate Equality Index. So choose the most appropriate score for your organization. First one is 90% to 100%, 70 to 89, 40 to 69%, less than 39%. Your company doesn't participate in the CEI. You don't know what the score is, or you prefer not to say, or it's not applicable. So please select the answer that fits for you and hit submit. It looks like we have 127 people on the web today with us, so we are close to having everyone respond. So with about 98 folks in, we have 74 responses of 90 to 100%, which is fantastic. We have about 9% of the folks on this call at 70 to 89%. We have no one that's at less than 39%, which is also pretty fantastic. And 4.8% of us don't participate in the CEI. So thanks everyone for participating in that. So our next poll question is, are you involved in submitting the CEI within your company? So select all that apply. First answer is no, I just know our score. No, and I don't know if we do it. Yes, compiling ERG information. Yes, compiling HR data. Yes, as an executive sponsor. Yes, from a legal perspective. Other answers, please tap those in for us, or you prefer not to say. So again, choose all of the answers that apply for you, and then hit submit. So we've got about 80 folks that have responded so far, so I'll give you guys a few moments to continue with that. All right, so a few more moments. Right, about 44% of us are a part of the CEI submission committees or process for our organizations. We've got another 31% who are just aware of the score, and some HR folks who are, yes, compiling HR data for the CEI. So that's a nice little look at what we've got going on. And with that, I'd like to turn everything over to Dina Fetus, who works all the time with the CEI, to explain and talk to us about some of the upcoming changes on the CEI. Dina?
Terrific. Thank you so much, Q. And this is Dina Fetus. I'm the Director of the Workplace Equality Program at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. Just looking over the list of attendees, and I'm seeing quite literally dozens of familiar names. So again, thank you all so much for your partnership in this. And certainly we want to thank Out and Equal for their years of leadership on workplace equality and their steadfast partnership with us in developing the absolute gold standards in workplace inclusion. So with that, my email address is right there. It's quite simple, dina.fedos@hrc.org. I know many of you regularly correspond with us. You can reach me, or you can also email us at cei@hrc.org. So on the small chance that folks on the call are not as familiar with the Human Rights Campaign, just to recap that we are the nation's largest LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender civil rights organization. We are inching up to 2 million members and supporters domestically and increasingly abroad. And we have quite a footprint on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and our website gets over 1 million visitors a month. Pardon me, I'm broadcasting from a hotel, and so there's a tiny bit of construction, so I do hope you're not receiving any feedback. Most of you know us as the Index folks. We have been administering the Corporate Equality Index for 12 years. You may also know us by our consumer-friendly Buying for Workplace Equality Guide. It's a printed guide and an iPhone application. But apart from these flagship reports, we are constantly traveling the country, getting direct feedback from you, our corporate partners, getting feedback from coalition organizations such as Out and Equal and National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, amongst others, consulting directly with big businesses, and also producing resources that are on emerging subjects. Many of you were part of our very significant work on transgender inclusive healthcare coverage. And you see that rather modest looking, but certainly a change agent of a resource guide in the upper left there, transgender inclusive healthcare coverage and the Corporate Equality Index. So just to give you a sense of the full spectrum of our work. Now, to situate us in terms of where we're going with the 2016 CEI, I want to briefly go back in time. So you'll just indulge me. You'll see how where we started certainly informs where we are today. So back in 2002, when we started the Corporate Equality Index, LGBT people in the United States faced tremendous barriers to legal protections, from issues of physical safety to workplace discrimination, as well as relationship and family recognition. And what do we mean by that? In a very real way, Lawrence v. Texas had not been decided by the Supreme Court. In other words, there were places in the United States in which certain homosexual acts remained criminalized. No state had same-sex marriage, and the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, went unchallenged. Not even hate crimes on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity were federally recognized as other hate crimes were. Certainly Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the law of the land. And lastly, in 2002, as is the case today, there were not federally defined workplace protections on the basis of both sexual orientation and gender identity alongside other protected categories. Of course, there is an asterisk there around how the current EEOC is treating gender identity, but in terms of legislative change, this is where we were, and some of these, of course, have changed quite rapidly in the last year and two. Others are still in process. So it was within this environment that the Human Rights Campaign, in conjunction with an early group of business advisors, came up with our first Corporate Equality Index. I often joke, as you can see on this black and white report, this was back in the day when HRC apparently did not invest quite as much in graphic design. So a rather humble-looking report that certainly became a major change agent. So the Corporate Equality Index was the first national scorecard for LGBT equality in the workplace. We pride ourselves then, as we do today, that this measure is transparent, fair, and attainable. What we mean by that is there's no guesswork. Your score can quite literally be calculated as it was in 2002 today on a little notepad or on the back of a napkin. We also have a driving mantra that it be fair and attainable, and that this is not a scorecard that should be prohibitively difficult for any business that wants to participate. We don't rank businesses number 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera for the year. Rather, every business has an opportunity to get to that 100%. And so the first 2002 CEI was based on the equality principles, and you'll see that many of these remain the backbone of today's CEI. Workplace protections on the basis of both gender identity and sexual orientation was in the 2002 index, as it is today. Equal benefits, at the time we were talking predominantly about domestic partner benefits, healthcare benefits, and we've evolved significantly on that. Employee resource groups, diversity training, and external engagement. So on this next slide, I'd like to just walk you through the current framework and the point attribution for it. So today, about a third of the points are assigned to the non-discrimination policy. And then an additional 35 points go to equitable benefits. These would be both partner health insurance coverage, but also so-called soft benefits, often the non-health benefits. These can be leave, adoption, retirement benefits have become a very significant part of our equality conversation recently. And so it certainly is a heavily weighted scorecard on these baseline workplace protections and also benefits. You'll see that about 2/3 of the points go there. This is really for a few key reasons, many of which should, I'm guessing are rather obvious to you, but just in case, we still don't have passage of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And so LGBT workers need to see these protections explicitly spelled out by their private sector employers. So inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity. I often say that that is essentially the doorway into your business. Before you can even talk about LGBT workplace equality, that essential question is, do you have these baseline protections in place? Now, in terms of partner benefits and transgender inclusive benefits, both topics we'll talk a little bit more about. But it's worth pointing out that on average, apart from actual wages paid, so the salary or the hourly wage, the average American worker receives 1/5 of their compensation in the form of benefits. And so by affording equitable benefits to LGBT workers, you as a business are simply providing equal pay for equal work. And so you see that this is our driving mantra. And then once you sort of have those LGBT workers in the door, how are you retaining them? As some of the godparents, shall we say, or grandparents of the movement will tell you, in the early days when big private sector businesses were first implementing workplace protections and in some cases benefits, that resulted in a natural opening in which LGBT employees were able to be out. It was safe. And you get 6, 12, 18, 20 LGBT employees in a room, and all of a sudden you've got an employee network group. I say that in part jest, but it is quite, when you look at the history of many of our businesses, really how it happened. And so we continue to evaluate businesses on the inclusion of education and training programs and an employee network group. Lastly, a part of the Corporate Equality Index in which we've seen really significant growth would be external practices. So ways in which a private business is communicating their values of inclusion, building it into their business plan. And this can include, there just wasn't quite enough room on the slide for all the menu options, but it can include recruitment, marketing, philanthropy, legislative engagement, and supplier diversity. And so where we are today, you really couldn't pick up a newspaper without seeing how corporate America has not only updated their own policies and benefits well ahead of lawmakers, but they've turned around and become significant change agents. They've weighed in publicly before the Supreme Court. Just for point of reference, when the first Prop 8 battle was going on in California in 2008, fewer than 5 major businesses wanted to cross that, at the time, red line to publicly support marriage equality. Fast forward to last spring, and we, in concert with several other organizations, were able to file amicus briefs before the Supreme Court with 100 signatories, vast majority of which were from the business community, in that Prop 8, also known as the Perry case, and nearly 300 signatories in the case to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act. At the same time, if we can borrow the phrase, a rising tide lifting all boats, at the same time, you are seeing all corners of the U.S. start to exhibit the change that many LGBT employees have been working on for years. And we're really seeing it materialize in significant ways. I believe we have a dear friend from Cracker Barrel on the call, and I'll spotlight the incredible work that's being done at Cracker Barrel to implement sexual orientation protections, to actually have an employee network group. This was also, this past year was when the world's leader in retail, Walmart, finally extended both same and opposite sex partner benefits. So certainly the ground is shifting beneath our feet. And again, a real quick, I'm going to take you through just some of the results of the 2014 Corporate Equality Index to give us all a grounding in just how far you all have come in this work. And so every year, of course, businesses want to achieve that coveted best places to work for LGBT equality rating. Since we are cross-referencing back to our early days, in 2002, just 13 businesses had a 100% on the Corporate Equality Index. Today, that number, after 2 revisions to the scorecard, significant ones I might add, that number is now well over 300 at 304. And then apart from just top-rated businesses, we are seeing incredible, and in some cases quite literally life-changing policy implementation. So for years there has been a continued gap between sexual orientation protections and gender identity protections. And we are finally at the highest number in history. 60% of the Fortune 500 have gender identity protections. About 90% have sexual orientation. And so you can certainly bet that as part of our annual planning, we continue to look at companies untouched by this wave and continue to work on closing that gap between sexual orientation and gender identity protections. But it is quite staggering when you remember that at 60% today was just 3% in 2002. The visual on the right side of your screen, that shows beyond the Fortune 500 because, of course, the Corporate Equality Index accepts any business of 500 or more full-time U.S. employees. We have many Fortune 1000 ranked businesses, some privately held businesses, and certainly dozens of major law firms. So as you can see, gender identity protections are essentially the norm amongst the whole universe of CEI businesses. That current figure is 86%. And of course, in the last 12 years, we've also increased just the sheer number of businesses that have wanted to be ranked as part of the CEI. And the extent to which corporate America has weighed in on public policy in the last year was not limited to just marriage equality. In fact, we had over 120 major businesses sign on to the Business Coalition for Workplace Fairness. This was leading up to the fall historic Senate vote. While the Senate did pass it, of course it has not passed in the House, and so it is yet to be law of the land, and you will be seeing even more momentum in the coming months around passage of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. The businesses aren't just lending their names, they're also articulating precisely in their own words why ENDA makes good sense for their business. You see a small image there of Jan Jones, the former mayor of Las Vegas and very senior leader at Caesars Entertainment out of Nevada, who penned a very powerful op-ed, "Everyone's a winner with ACT to End Workplace Bias." So the second major pillar in which we continue to see rapid change would be on domestic partner health insurance and transgender inclusive health insurance. At this moment in time, 9 in 10 corporate equality companies and law firms extend equally between opposite-sex married couples and same-sex spouses or same-sex partners. Quite interestingly, as we are all have probably our foot in many fields of diversity, quite interestingly, 2/3 of those businesses extend partner benefits to both same and different sex partners. And so again, just another visual here. On the left, you see the growth of partner benefits, but these blue graphics, this shows the incredible growth of transgender inclusive healthcare coverage. For those of you that have been along this journey, I know many of you have because I recognize your names. You know that we announced changes to the CEI back in 2008 and early 2009. And we sought to eliminate exclusions to care, medically necessary care for transgender individuals. When we announced that change, we had an intensive couple years of work. Many of you may also know we work with national experts and also Out and Equal's own Jamison Green and his colleague Andre Wilson. These are global experts in transgender health. So where we are today is 46% of participants in the Corporate Equality Index afford an inclusive plan option to their workforce. There's a reason why you'll have to squint if you want to read the list of businesses on the right. That is sort of intentional, just to give you the visual of the 340 businesses that have at least one transgender inclusive healthcare plan. So just incredible, incredible growth there. And again, just to show you sort of how much we've jumped even in the last few years. Something that may be worth noting, again, for those of you that have been part of our journey the last few years, there are 304 businesses with a 100%, and there are 340 with transgender inclusive healthcare coverage. And so contrary to some of the beliefs leading up to our change in scorecard, implementing this coverage was not the make or break point for businesses. Most businesses have grasped this. They see that it is of overall nominal increase to their costs, and at the same time, it is not only the right thing to do, it's smart business because nobody wants to lose an employee to a competitor who invested in this healthcare when the original hosting company did not. And along the way, I'm guessing this is the case at Out and Equal, it's certainly the case at HRC, we have just had a 5-fold increase in the number of phone calls from transitioning employees, from HR, from management, of individuals actually able to realize their true gender identity and in many cases go through a medical transition. And so right alongside that progress, you see a significant growth. This is the second bar graphic here. Significant growth in the number of major employers with gender transition guidelines. So 262 today, over a threefold increase in the last few years. And these are some common sense guideposts around having respectful conversations, what is allowed or appropriate in the workplace, what isn't, how to update HR records, and so forth. So again, thank you so much for letting me sort of outline where we are today in terms of this incredible progress. I'll also just briefly show you where we are with our annual buyer's guide. Many of us are certainly champions in this space, and we certainly have our business case in hand. But especially in front of a skeptical audience, you know that the one thing that will get everybody's attention, that will make everybody sit up in their chairs, is the figure on the total buying power of the LGBT adult population, which, thanks to Witte Communications, is projected to be at $830 billion. And as we hopefully know, but if not, market research tends to show that this is an exceptionally savvy and loyal consumer market. And so part of the major carrot of the Corporate Equality Index is that these scores don't just live amongst us in the LGBT and allied community. These scores get translated from the Corporate Equality Index into our annual Buying for Equality Guide. That's available for free on the Apple App Store. And so every year, this is a resource that reaches millions of people. Some are LGBT identified, others are see this as a bellwether for fairness and the types of companies with which they want to spend their money. And so I sometimes joke that when all else fails, just remember to bring out these incredible aggregated estimates of just how much buying power there is within this community. So that's where we are. I'm going to transfer now to the criteria changes at a glance. And unlike the last time when we updated our criteria, this set of standards stems quite directly and in a rather linear fashion from one fundamental principle. So when I began this, I talked about the absolutely critical need for fully inclusive non-discrimination protections. So where we are today, and each individual of these three criteria sort of reflect different trends, and we'll walk through them. But where we are today is that for the 2016 CEI, for those of you that took the survey, you saw some expanded questions. We are looking for a global workplace non-discrimination policy and or code of conduct that protects on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. The second aspect of the changes speak to inclusive non-discrimination requirements for contractors and vendors, again, on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And the third, corporate giving guidelines. And so again, we're going to do a deeper dive on each one of these. So we announced with last year's Corporate Equality Index that these changes were coming. We always promise you, our business partners, at least a year's notice, and in this case we wanted to give you 2 full years to make these updates if they weren't made already. We continue to do webinars and outreach and also increase data collection. In this year, 2014, we're sending out a preliminary scorecard to our companies with the upcoming survey. And then calendar year 2015, which in CEI years is 2016, these changes will take place. So again, at this point, we will be about a year and a half from the new scorecard. And if you take down no other notes in this call, just know that there is an entire booklet outlining this along with FAQs. It's a dynamic document. In other words, if there are questions you have that aren't answered in this booklet, we will revise it and disseminate it. But you can access all of this. It's publicly available at hrc.org/2016 CEI. I'll say that just one more time, hrc.org/2016 CEI. Okay, so let's take a slightly more nuanced look at these criteria, or a closer look, I should say. So first off, the non-discrimination policy or code of conduct prohibiting LGBT bias are consistent throughout the company, including outside the U.S. So that is the aspect of this that is global in nature. For just reference on that, it is currently federal law that a business is in fact held accountable to protect its workers from forms of bias that fall under federal EEO law. So what we're proposing is squarely within the legal tradition of the U.S., and certainly we are continuing to enshrine into law sexual orientation and gender identity protections, but what we're talking about is that level of consistent protection across the business. The second is U.S. only, not because we don't think this should be global in nature, but because we feel it's important to take fair and attainable steps forward. And so in this 2016 criteria, we are looking for supplier codes of conduct or non-discrimination policies that include LGBT. And I'm going to show some examples in the next slide. And then lastly, we want to ensure that within the U.S., your corporate philanthropy is not going to a secular organization with written policies that discriminate against the LGBT community. So I'm going to actually take that one first because it is in some ways rather straightforward. Most of you will recognize these headlines. The Boy Scouts of America 2.5 years ago doubled down on their long-standing policy of discrimination against the LGBT community. In other words, they specifically and in writing prohibit, at the time they prohibited Scouts, and today they have eased that, but they still prohibit membership and employment on the basis of sexual orientation. And unlike 10, 12 years ago when this policy had another sort of furor of attention, the national mood has really changed. And you saw highly rated businesses that were known for their inclusive policies respond. And so one of the headlines here, UPS ending grants to Boy Scouts over discrimination. This really spurred a national conversation about the extent to which a fair-minded employer can or should be giving money to, again, a secular organization. So we're not talking about religious organizations. There are some companies that give gifts to charitable and religiously affiliated organizations, but Boy Scouts really stand outside that. And when we at HRC began to do our research to see just how common would corporate giving standards be, we found that it's actually a lot more common than we initially thought. Or perhaps we should have thought that it would be common because, again, we're talking about the transfer of often millions of dollars every year in philanthropy. And so you see a couple of scans here. These are publicly available documents. We have others for your reference. But what we found is that many businesses have explicit guidelines in place to ensure that money is not flowing from the company coffers to a group that defies its own non-discrimination policy. So you see a scan on there of BAE Systems and also Levi Strauss. But again, there are quite literally dozens more. And I just wanted to spotlight for you a few more that have taken these steps. You rarely see these three companies together, Coach, Alcoa, and Caterpillar. But worth noting here that by Caterpillar's own standards, they decided to divest money away from the Boy Scouts due to their discrimination policy. And so in terms of that, because we had seen these trend lines already forming on corporate philanthropy, we felt confident that this was a reasonable standard. So for those of you that do not have these guidelines yet, there are many templates out there for you to replicate. And again, we at HRC are more than happy to assist you with that. The second, also quite straightforward, is that for the last few years we've included in our survey a question on supplier standards. And at this point in time, about 2/3 of you have indicated that you do spell out supplier standards for your Tier 1 suppliers. Tier 1 suppliers are contractors. On here you see what some regard as the gold standard furnished by AT&T. So this is their statement of expectations of suppliers with respect to a range of not only identity markers but also issues, a prohibition on use of corporal punishment, threats of violence, physical abuse. So in many ways global in nature, and also clearly spelling out expectations that relate to the LGBT community. So again, we are talking about corporate giving guidelines, supplier standards. This is largely change that can occur through conversations within your businesses and eventually encoding this in paper. So it is different in some respects from our last round of changes that often required multiple entities at once. This is, we hope, and all the data points to these being rather straightforward changes for your business. So I saved on our scale of complexity, I saved the most complex for last, but again, we're finding from you all that this is something you already do or are hoping to do. So the reality is that most businesses in the CEI have a global footprint. In fact, over 2/3 do. Many of which are in countries that have laws on the books criminalizing homosexual acts. And again, I began this conversation by introducing you to that crazy world that was the United States in 2002, a country that had not yet eliminated the criminalization of certain homosexual acts. So the lessons that we have all learned together are certainly applicable as we move forward and look at the global landscape. So this may come as a surprise to some of you, but we have actually included questions on non-discrimination policies globally and other aspects of corporate policy globally since 2004. So we're going on a decade of data collection here. And rather consistently, 85% of you have self-reported to us that the non-discrimination policy you submit for your score is in fact globally applicable. 52% of you say that, well, you may or may not have the global application of that EEO policy, you do have a global code of conduct that protects on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And so with some of these trend lines becoming clear, organizations like Out and Equal, HRC, Immigration Equality, the Council for Global Equality, all of us have begun to produce resources and work and learn from some of those best-in-class practices amongst our employers. And so you see some images on here. Again, all of this we're more than happy to send to you, but you see some images of existing reports. Anchoring Equality was a breakthrough report that all of the aforementioned organizations, really we all combined our efforts to produce this, and it looked at some of the ways that, for example, Royal Dutch Shell was mitigating the concerns and potential risk of transferring LGBT employees to places like Nigeria. There were also stellar examples in that report from IBM and other top businesses that have really been at the forefront of global inclusion. Now, having said all that, I just want to reiterate that the new standard in the 2016 Corporate Equality Index is quite simply the global application of an inclusive non-discrimination policy. Now there certainly is a whole spectrum of issues that Out and Equal and HRC and all of us are talking about with respect to global LGBT equality, but just to sort of bring us back to earth, if you will, on precisely what we're asking, this is, we think, very straightforward, and as emerging issues come up, certainly Russia has been in the spotlight. We are going to grapple with those in concert with you. In many ways, stateside, we've all been thrown curveballs from, health insurance, state to state, complications administering domestic partner benefits in light of relationship bans, So we acknowledge that this is not a completely turnkey issue. It's not about just putting the words in the policy. At the same time, we think it's a needed and meaningful step towards greater consistency in how you, the leading businesses, are in fact making this a reality, office to office or plant to plant. And so just a couple of examples of businesses that have really led the way in this sphere. There are quite literally dozens more. But, we also wanted to bubble up some additional best practices. Some of our firms have reported that they have protocols in place to evaluate and mitigate the safety and welfare concerns of all employees. So, for example, if you are LGBT and you are facing the potential of a hardship post, is there somebody designated with whom you can speak, whether it's about safety concerns outside the business, whether it's about moving your family there. So again, these are some of the best practices that are really that companies are only able to administer once they have these basic workplace protections in place globally. So again, there's not a there's no, we hope, additional explanation here apart from, that EEO policy that all of you submit every year, is that applied globally? And if it's not a right fit, because we understand some businesses have said to us, look, the intention is there, but we really can't take our very U.S. policy and simply export it. So in that case, you have really great examples, IBM being one, of a comprehensive code of conduct. So the spirit is there, whether it's called the EEO policy or the code of conduct. And again, we at HRC and I'm certain Out and Equal also look forward to working with you. So with that, I wanted to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I understand we also have some additional polling next. But we'll just take one moment on this slide. It's not a Hollywood invitation. You are more than welcome to email me at dina.fidas@hrc.org, or our staff also answers the CEI@hrc.org email address.
Thanks so much for all of that information. Dina, so we did, of course, have a few questions. The first question, I think, goes to the first part of your presentation. Adam wanted to know, he was saying, sorry, he was a bit confused, which was the 30 points and which was the 35 points in the new, I guess, in this structure that you were talking about earlier.
Certainly. I'm glad you asked, Adam. So, and I'm happy to, Q, can I go back to that slide? Is it? Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm clicking through right now, so bear with me, everybody. So the 30 and 35 points is under the current framework, and 30 points goes to an inclusive non-discrimination policy, one that has sexual orientation and gender identity, so 15 and 15 points. We have 15 points for core domestic partner health insurance coverage, 10 points for additional soft benefits in that area, so partner leave, partner retirement options, and so forth, and then 10 points in transgender inclusive benefits. So the 30 points is on non-discrimination, the 35 points is on all LGBT inclusive benefits.
All right, thank you so much for that. The next question is from Edward, and the question was, has HRC or Out and Equal been able to gather economic data, lessons learned from the 340 companies to help others with transgender medical benefit implementation?
Yeah,
well, I know from the Out and Equal side, we have we've been collecting data on best practices, and we transfer, or we will talk with other organizations that contact us about how to implement that, or some of the ways that other organizations have already implemented that. So on Out and Equal, then yes, we are working on that. Do we have the economic data? No.
And thanks, Q. Absolutely. So I think both of us are sort of working in concert on that. So we do have cost data at HRC, and we're also more than happy to make peer-to-peer referrals. So if you're looking for a comparable company, whether in size or in industry we're happy to do that. We also are looking at additional resources being developed around acquiring the coverage and acquiring true best-in-class coverage. So I would direct you at this point to our website, www.hrc.org/transbenefits, all one word, and you can download our resource paper there. That resource paper is going to undergo some changes in the coming weeks, but the totality of the information there is still on target in terms of what you need to build the business case internally, and also look at the carriers with this coverage as part of their as part of products they offer. That's not to say you won't have to actually negotiate them. And also we do include some cost data there as well. I should also note that if you do want to look at cost data with an even more fine-tooth comb, the Williams Institute has recently put out some additional information on the cost of these benefits.
Thank you, Dina. Next question we have is from Lynn. And Lynn's question is, what if a company provides funding to an organization, i.e. the United Way, which supports an organization who discriminates, i.e. the Boy Scouts? How does that affect the scoring?
So the Boy Scouts still, okay, sorry. I was looking at the second question too, and I'll answer both. So number one, we are not going to count contributions to the United Way against a company. We are talking about a direct contribution between the company and the Boy Scouts. And just to anticipate the question about the Boy Scouts, while it was a significant and meaningful change on the part of the Boy Scouts to allow gay scouts, this is still a secular 501c3 organization that actively discriminates in their membership against gay leaders. And so at present, the Boy Scouts would fall under the new criteria as an organization to not have centralized giving go to them.
Okay. So that answers those two questions, I believe. The next question was from Adam. Supplier standards are only for Tier 1 U.S.-based suppliers? Oh, and that was the question, was that the standards are only for U.S.-based suppliers. And they were asking because they work for General Motors and they think they have hundreds of suppliers.
And that's true. So thank you so much, Adam. And we do include that in the booklet. We are aware that some of our companies have quite literally hundreds of suppliers, if not in some extreme cases, thousands. And so we are looking at the scope of major suppliers and contractors, in other words, Tier 1 within the United States.
Right. Our next question is from Janet, and she wanted to know where do you get a copy of the Anchoring Equality information?
Anchoring Equality is available on the HRC website, and I believe it's also available on the Out and Equal website and the Council for Global Equality. So I don't have a short link at my fingertips, but I would simply Google Anchoring Equality Report, and probably all of our websites will come up, and you can download that PDF.
Awesome. The next question is from Heidi. And Heidi says, as far as I can tell, the CEI doesn't measure anything related to any of the unique concerns of bisexuals. Is there any plan to address the issues of the largest population of the LGBT acronym? An example would be training for ERG members and non-LGBT employees on bisexuality.
It's a wonderful question, Heidi. I think that some of the metrics we have that are getting more granular are on the workplace climate. Within the CEI, it's known as organizational competency. I would say, though, that the feedback we get is, non-discrimination policies that protect on the basis of sexual orientation, fully equitable benefits. I mean, these are all of critical importance to individuals of the bi community, and so I wouldn't completely cast that aside. I do very much hear the point, though, that often the B is silent, and we see that silence have a great impact, and we see it borne out in ERG programming and even in the ways in which people casually talk about the community. I personally am hearing more people in the news talk about gay and transgender and sort of erasing LGBT as a full community. So having said that, we can continue to look and would certainly welcome feedback under organizational competency. We ask about trainings, and we ask about several types of trainings, and we specify that the business offer scenarios or definitions of these terms. So that's one start in terms of the sort of concrete nature of the CEI. But I would also say that in a couple of weeks, we're going to be releasing our next iteration of our Workplace Climate Report. And some of the more nuanced ways in which the diversity of our community can be better known are in fact suited to that type of combination of qualitative and quantitative analysis. So there may be some aspects of both the CEI and our companion work in the workplace climate studies that can speak to that. But having said that, I think that we should probably, and anybody else on the call with a similar set of feedback, please do get in touch with us. The CEI is evolving, and it evolves because we get this very type of commentary from the community. So thanks so much for raising that.
Thank you for answering that. Next question is from Raylene. I'm sorry, I may be pronouncing the name wrong, and I apologize for that. What are the most challenging areas of the new criteria?
Thanks so much, Raylene. It's always great to see your name in the inbox here. So, I can't really say. I can tell you that we codified these criteria, these 3 changes, based on the data trends we could see. And so for all of them, we had a critical mass of at least 2/3 of our companies. So having said that, it will really depend on your business. I would say we've gotten the most feedback about global inclusion and sort of continued questions, and some of these questions are having to be answered or grappled with in real time. Again, the most prominent example is all that's transpired in Russia recently. Quite frankly, in the conversations we've been having with companies, there are some very differing opinions on their ability within Russia, for example, to have an active employee network group. Some businesses feel very protective of them and feel that they can continue to move forward with them in Russia. Others feel that it skirts a little bit too close to what is now a very murky legal line. Again, nothing in the CEI should ever compel a business to violate the law as they understand it. But we also know from the experiences both within the U.S. and globally that even within a grim legal environment, even within those countries that criminalize homosexual acts, I'm going to borrow a joke from one of the leaders at IBM, hopefully those acts aren't taking place in your workplace. In other words, these types of draconian laws do not necessarily prohibit a business from implementing some basic expectations of non-discrimination in the workplace. So I think that the question will probably be directed more to our audience today of, what do you anticipate having the most struggles with, and how can we out in Equal and HRC help you in that?
Well, thank you so much. The next question that we have is from Lynn, and the question is, I believe one of the slides indicated, quote, were already existing supplier codes or codes of conduct or non-discrimination policies include LGBT, end quote. Does that mean that if a supplier does not have a code of conduct or non-discrimination policies, a company could potentially still procure with them and not fail this criteria?
That's a great question. And so, the spirit of the CEI is not to give a sort of free pass, if you will, to a business that says, oh, well, we don't have a code of conduct, because these certainly should be in place. And if a business is procuring major contracts nationally and abroad, almost assuredly there are some standards in place. And so, no, we wouldn't give sort of a pass, if you will, to a business that says, oh, we don't actually have any standards. It would be akin to saying we don't have a non-discrimination policy.
Thank you. The next question is from Kathy. Kathy's question is, it has been very helpful in the past to view policies from other companies, i.e. transition guidelines, as samples on the HRC website. Will you provide examples of the global non-discrimination policies?
Thanks so much, Kathy. Yes, we do have examples of those on our website. Again, for many of our businesses, there is quite literally no distinction between the non-discrimination policy that you can access via a Google search. So that non-discrimination policy that's on the company website is global in nature. So for some of this, it's on HRC to validate with the company that that language does in fact apply globally. I do want to reiterate that these are very straightforward policies, and that often we don't see great variation in any way between the EEO policies so many of us are familiar with and those global non-discrimination policies. You will sometimes see additional categories. For example, some international financial institutions, the UN, when you look at entities that have been operating globally, are global in nature, and have been since their inception, you'll start to see patterns. For example, throughout Latin America, you often see explicit protections and call-outs for the indigenous community. So there are going to be some that are, again, depending on where you operate, probably already established practice. But again, we are talking about simply the global application, which so many of our businesses have already reported they are doing, of their inclusive non-discrimination policy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. The next question that we have up, Mary McFarland, I believe, the 2016 CEI changes to supplier guidelines. Am I correct in understanding that it's saying only if current guidelines already exist? And I think you may have answered something similar just a couple of questions back.
Right.
So if we didn't get that, if that was a different question that you wanted answered, please could you clarify that in the chat box for me, and we'll get back to that. Mary Ellen's question is, what is needed to fulfill the retention aspect, internal practices, on, oh goodness, I think the internal aspects on this current slide that you have up.
So this is just a slightly, thank you, Mel. This is a slightly different visual representation of our existing scorecard. We've tried to attach it more to business goals of retention and recruitment, but under retention, we are talking about the category that you all are familiar with in the CEI called organizational competency. And that has a couple, that's the one that has a menu of options that can always grow. Again, speaking to Heidi's very astute comment, we can always add options there. So we're talking about new hire training, supervisor or managerial training, integrated trainings, optional self-ID of LGBT employees, gender transition guidelines, and then senior leader metrics related to fulfilling LGBT diversity goals. So for many of you, you're getting credit in that section through a combination of 3 out of those, I think it was 6 efforts in total. And then the second part of that internal practices or retention aspect of the CEI speaks to having an LGBT and allied employee network group or diversity council.
Excellent. And really quickly, I just wanted to point out we have a couple people that have to drop off, but one being Will, who wanted to say, just wanted to say thank you. Great presentation. I look forward to maintaining our CEI score of 100 with these excellent policies. Thanks. So thank you, Will. I appreciate that. Next question is from Robin. Do you have any kind of economic data about what happens when a non-LGBT friendly company becomes public? For example, Chick-fil-A or Hobby Lobby.
It's a fabulous question. I wish we had that type of silver bullet number, but we don't. But certainly if anybody on this call does, we would absolutely love to get that type of analysis.
Yes. Let's see. Lisa's question is, what if your local Boy Scout Council, say in Minnesota, doesn't follow the national guidelines? Would a donation to them count against the corporation?
We have been asked this question before, and certainly if a business is supporting an explicitly inclusive chapter of the BSA, number one, I'm not actually sure if BSA then would continue to recognize them as officially a BSA affiliate. But if you, the company, can in fact provide that paper trail and the proof that this is an inclusive chapter, then we would certainly not hold that against a business. But that's certainly a high threshold. So I would just sort of caution that truly everything is in writing and there is a complete understanding of that troop's practices.
Fantastic. Okay. Janet has a question for corporate giving standards. Will HRC supply a list, or is it on the company to find out the policy?
So we do not provide a list of organizations that would defy this. Rather, we trust you, the businesses, to spot check or to put forth these proactive guidelines for all the organizations receiving your money. We also I think I gave this background in person at Out and Equal, but for years we have actually been double checking the tax records of all of our CEI companies because we've needed to ensure that no business getting a CEI ranking is simultaneously giving money to an organization like NOM, the National Organization for Marriage. So that's a group with a very specific purpose of undermining equality. So even though we've been doing that for years, we have not provided a list, quite frankly, because that would be a very potent tool, if you will, for somebody looking to dismantle aspects of equality. So the no-no list is not one that you'll get from HRC. Certainly if you have any questions about the policies of a group receiving your funding, do reach out to us. But again, this is simply looking at whether or not a recipient organization has a written policy like the Boy Scouts that explicitly discriminates against the community. I know some of that language might even sound overly deliberate or convoluted. It's because we really have vetted this through dozens of our corporate partners in this work and landed on this standard.
Thank you so much. Next question that we have is from Larissa. I read and hear a lot about the Boy Scouts, but little has been said about the Salvation Army and their stance. Is Out and Equal aware or involved in any activity with that group? Will donations to this organization also be reflected within an organization score? Out and Equal is definitely aware, and we do not encourage folks to donate to the Salvation Army. So, but as far as the CEI goes,
Salvation Army, my understanding is that they would technically fall into the non-secular or religious exemption. That being said, we, like Out and Equal, do not encourage major corporate giving to the Salvation Army, and we know that many businesses have decided to provide funding to a comparable organization, but one that does not have, a history of discriminatory practices against the LGBT community. It's actually a little more complicated than one would think to completely suss out the religious nature of a group, but at present it's our understanding that they are in fact a religious entity.
All right. Next question we have is from Todd. Is there a consolidated list of organizations that have a written policy of discrimination against LGBT individuals? I'm interested in how the question will be asked and how HRC will be verifying the responses.
So again, I hope that we've sort of elaborated on this, but certainly I would encourage asking any other aspects of that haven't been answered. We won't be furnishing a list. whenever a major business is transferring thousands or millions of dollars, there is a vetting process. And so we are looking to the companies to provide for us at HRC their corporate giving guidelines. We're not necessarily asking for a list of all of the organizations receiving your funding, but we are looking for your guidelines so that, again, in the history and sort of spirit of the CEI, if there's ever an issue, an individual employee can raise it. The CEI is primarily a tool of individual empowerment. So that if I'm an LGBT worker and I see that my company is giving a significant donation to a group that I know discriminates against the community, I can bring that concrete set of guidelines forward and have that conversation.
Thank you so much. The next question is from Jennifer Brown. As a supplier, will we then be asked by our 100% clients to have an LGBT inclusive non-discrimination policy in place? Or will it be sufficient to adhere to the client's existing policy? And secondly, a second related question is, how will large corporations measure the presence of these policies in their thousands of suppliers? Some Fortune 500, I think 50, well, it says 50, but I think 500 companies have over 100,000 suppliers.
So thank you so much, Jennifer. To meet this criterion, it would be sufficient to adhere to the client's existing policy. However, it is certainly a best practice of businesses to ask their suppliers to furnish their own non-discrimination policy.
Great. All right, so the next question is from David, who had an audio issue and was asking again, do offshore contracting companies that we use need to also follow our non-discrimination policy?
Again, that's certainly a best practice, but if you're talking about an offshore contracting company, that would not currently fit within this framework. It's certainly where we're headed, so by no means should that progress or momentum be stymied at all, but again, we are trying to have standards in place that are in fact attainable in the next in this 2-year framing.
So the last question we have right now is from Caitlin, and it says, the corporate giving standards include the corporate matching gift program.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you asked that question, and that is a question that's contained in our workbook for success. We are going to be ensuring that businesses are not, again, it is a matching program, so while it's the individual choice of the employees, that is still company money flowing to organizations. So we would consider matching within that centralized giving mechanism. Having said that, this is also an aspect of sort of PR or risk mitigation. The example that comes to mind is a couple years ago at the World Bank, PFOX, the Parents and Friends of Ex-Gays, a group that advocates for, reparative therapy essentially, was a featured matching gift recipient. And that caused, a real firestorm and had to get resolved. And so the same standards for direct contribution should apply to the list of organizations receiving matching gift money.
Excellent. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. I think you guys gave us 21 total questions for Dina today, so thank you very much, everyone, for submitting your questions. And Dina had mentioned before that we have a couple more polls we'd like you to participate in. So the next poll is, my company will score 100% on the new 2016 Global Workplace Non-Discrimination Policy and or Code of Conduct. And please choose the answer you feel most appropriately fits your workplace situation. And again, hit submit. We have about 73 people still on the call, which is a huge thank you guys for sticking around. We're almost at the end of our time today. So we've got about 27 folks so far, about a third of us. So 23% say they strongly agree, 25%, 26% say they agree, About 23% are neutral. A couple of people actually strongly disagree. 5.7% of our folks so far. Let's see what we have there. All right. So about 30% of us agree, or 30% they agree that they'll make it. So the next question that we have is my company will score 100% on the new 2016 inclusive non-discrimination requirements for contractors and vendors. Again, choose the answer that is most appropriate for your situation. Hit submit, and we'll start looking at answers. I think there might have been one other question. Another question for you was, as we're waiting on everyone to chime in on the poll. There's a question from Lisa that says, we do over 500 matching gifts a year. Is there a resource that lists good or bad organizations? I think you may have answered that earlier, but I'm not really sure. All right, so with our poll, we've got about a third of the folks that have answered. 28% are about neutral, and that's the largest voting block we have so far about the inclusive non-discrimination requirements for contractors and vendors. 25% agree, and we have about 15% that strongly agree. So, we have one last poll, and we'll pick up maybe one more question because we won't be able to answer any more questions after this poll because we're running out of time today. Let's see, the last poll question is, my company will score 100% on the 2016 corporate giving guidelines. Again, strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, or not applicable. Choose whichever suits your situation and hit submit. So right about now we've got about 30% of us are saying that we're pretty neutral on that. 21% agree, and 21% strongly agree. So thank you all for participating in the poll. Dina, is there anything you wanted to add to the closing comments before we end today?
I apologize. One housekeeping issue is that I saw something creep up in this PowerPoint that's from an older version. So Q, I'm just making sure you have the most current version before you send it out, and that's coming in an email to you and Pat. Apologies for the final note on housekeeping. But again, thank you all so much to Out and Equal for always being such a tremendous partner and for all the work that you do. And thank you to all the participants. I'm already seeing some emails. We really want this to be a partnership with HRC and you and collaborative groups like Out and Equal moving forward. So please, any bump in the road, any nuance that you don't feel we've quite covered, we do want to hear from you so that we can hopefully in 2016 turn the page to even more true best-in-class practices of LGBT equality.
Thank you so much, Dina. Thank you for your time. I know your schedule's always booked, so we appreciate you partnering with us to give everyone this information, which is an incredible boost and a great heads up and a way to map out how you continue to have that 100% or that high score on the CEI. So I want to thank you all for sticking it out. It's exactly 1:15 when we wanted to end our presentation today. So I want to thank you for your participation. There will be a survey after we end the call. Our next virtual summit, as I said, will be on Tuesday, February 4th. It's also going to be sponsored by Sprint and Fannie Mae. And it's on the power of LGBT in growth markets. And we've got folks from IBM all over the world in IBM that will be joining us for that call. If you would consider a donation to Out and Equal, head to our website and look for the donate button. We hope you can join us again in 2014 for our Out and Equal Workplace Summit, November 3rd through the 6th, taking place in San Francisco this year. So thank you all very much. And we'll have this up on our website by the beginning of the week. So thanks a lot. And Dina, if you'll hold for just a little bit.